Welcome to Knock Talk. I'm your host, William Hahn, broadcasting live from Kingsland, Texas, USA, with another episode of Controversial Issues with Rabbi Chaim Coffman from the Holy Land. Today's discussion is going to be on the proof of God's existence. So the title of it, of course, is appropriately spoken. There's so many people out there who not only have chosen the path of being atheists altogether, but also the agnostics. They're not really sure, whatever the case may be. Some of these even turning their back on God altogether, from leaving the New Testament behind and throwing out the entire Bible altogether because they found out that the New Testament was false. So this will be a good show for all of you guys to be exposed to for this information. So Rabbi, welcome back, and glad you're here with us.
Always a pleasure. You can't get that out without laughing, can you?
It's checkmate, Coffman. Sound like a wrestling
I don't think
wrestler.
It'll ever happen. We'll see. Every week we'll see what happens.
That's funny.
You can say it with a straight face, then I'll down some bourbon or something or whatever.
Okay, that sounds good.
So we'll see how it goes.
Right on.
Yeah, definitely very very interesting topic. I want to hit it from a few different sides. I don't think it's going to be one shot.
Probably 2 or 3 episodes, maybe.
To be continued, most likely.
Okay.
Right, but we'll hit the first thing first. What are the possibilities before we even get into any proofs? What are the 3 possible attitudes towards God? One is, I know for sure, nothing to talk about. God exists. God's absolute, runs the world, nothing to talk about. What's the second possibility? Agnostic, not sure. Maybe is, maybe isn't. And the third, obviously, would be someone who's an atheist, right? They're absolutely sure God, doesn't exist. So the obvious question, we live in a very cynical world, right? There's an obvious question, why righteous people suffer, evil people have it easy. If God is all good, how can it be that, all these things happen? So there are a lot of doubts, seemingly in the world, and we're going to hopefully going to show that at least through logic, through some text as well, in order to see that you can look at it in a logical way. And a person can always doubt. I had somebody, I used to tutor many years ago. He was at Hebrew University, working with college students. And he said, you could prove the Torah 99%. I still have my 1% doubt. So even if you show, everything, you're not going to be able to show everything, but, hopefully you show enough evidence, it would give you permission, certainly to believe that, there is a God, that he exists. So what's the first possibility? How do I know God exists? Maybe God came to the person, right? Maybe an out-of-body experience, right? Everyone who has an out-of-body experience, everyone goes through the same thing. Their soul hovers over the body, exactly what the Zohar says. They see this great light, whatever. And obviously, if they don't come back to their body, well, they die, right? So obviously, it's not good. So if they come back to their body, that can be a proof. Certainly a proof that there's something beyond, right? Something beyond, this world, etc. Or they go through certain things, whatever it may be, that can only be explained by saying this is a godly thing. It cannot be explained, in a normal way, right? So a lot of things today we understand, we know through indirect evidence, right? One example is that, in history, there was such a person. There was an American president by the name of Abraham Lincoln. Well, I think they toppled some of his statues recently, but everyone would agree, right? Everyone would agree that he existed, right? He wrote letters. We have other proof, whatever it is, but not because anybody ever met him. Say, wait a minute, there's a Wikipedia article. Saw it on the internet, but nobody met him, right? No one's around today that ever met him. So there's no other way to explain his existence, but it's a universal accepted, tradition, that he existed. Okay, there's plenty of evidence to show that, but no one was around, right? No one today, unless they're, more than 150 years old, which would be pretty impossible, right? But no one's around today in order to say that. Now, many people have absolutely made fools of themselves by proclaiming things that weren't true, right? Non-existence of certain things. For example, no such place as Europe. There's nothing west of Europe, right? There's nothing smaller than an atom, right? Or a natural force besides gravity, magnetism, or whatever. So what is atheism, right? Atheism is a state of knowing God does not 100% exist. Now, there's ample enough evidence, certainly to show, we're just going to show a few things tonight or this afternoon, depending where you are, showing that being an atheist 100% is, irrational. And there are plenty of rational people, that act or think, in an irrational way. So now some people are going to say, well, what's really the difference between someone who's an atheist and someone who's an agnostic, right? So there are those that are skeptic. They say maybe there is a God, maybe we don't have enough proof. There could be, maybe there isn't, or whatever. But they have doubts. Right? They have doubts that we mentioned before, why bad things happen to good people, why the righteous suffer, right? All these other things. But it could be that what's the alternative? The alternative, if I'm not a doubter, well, I have two alternatives. One is God never exists, there's no such thing, everything happens the way it happens, and that's it. What's the other alternative? There is a God who runs the world. Right? So agnostic is somewhere in the beginning. Now, where does someone who's an atheist, right? Where do they come from, right? Where exactly do they come from? So I didn't run a test over here, but I would assume atheists come from a few different places. One's going to be maybe the parents weren't religious, so they ingrained them, in their kids in order to believe that there is no God. Stuff happens, that's it. And they were basically brainwashed, right? Brainwashed as a child, and that was ingrained in them, right? That could be one thing. Some say it could be 100% a rebellion against religion. They don't have anything to do with it. They were forced into it. They had to go to Hebrew school, or they had to go to CCD, or, whatever it is, and they hated going to church, or they hated going to synagogue, or whatever, and that's it. They don't want to have anything, they don't want to have anything to do with it. Right? It could be a rebellion like that. It could also be any number of emotional reasons. So they don't see their position, as necessarily being irrational. Someone's going to think, do I think God exists? No, I'm pretty positive, right? Not like they've researched, not like they thought of it. Doesn't mean people don't have questions. Questions are 100% legitimate. One major difference between Judaism and Catholicism, we love questions. Right? Hopefully we have some answers along the way. But if you're held in contempt every time you ask a question, everything gets suppressed. So there aren't any answers. There must be no God. There must be nothing. So it could be a religious issue. It could be, a person basically got brainwashed as a child. The parents inculcated them. It could happen through school. It could happen through any number of things. It could be emotional, etc. But what essentially is the base argument, right? Which we're not really going to do. It's not going to hit that now. But what their base argument is basically what we mentioned, is that we look at the world today, and the world today looks totally upside down, right? Chaos, 100%. They defund the police. They don't defund the police. Whatever it is, it's chaos out there, right? And seemingly innocent people are suffering. People get sick. People die young, people get killed in car accidents, other things, or whatever. And people, you look at the world, it's upside down. So when you look at the world itself, people are going to say, come on, if we understand what's the premise normally is that God is good, right? If I'm a Zoroastrian, well, that's very easy. There's a dual God. There's a good God, there's a bad God. Right? It's almost like Catholicism. You got Mr. S, you got a fallen angel, right? So he does all the evil. So, God takes a break. He's, smoking a cigar. He's having a pina colada or your Bloody Mary or whatever, right? So he's smoking a cigar, whatever it is, and Mr. S is taking care of everything else. Well, obviously, it's not a Jewish concept. Obviously, we have to take responsibility, for our actions. But because of this, I think this main question of seeing, let's say, loved ones suffer, seeing, people die, for no reason, right? Seemingly no, wrong place, wrong time, whatever it is, and they have this fundamental question that if something like this happens, there can't be God, right? So you say, is that really irrational? I think that's where the base, the base of it is that, there's been suffering and they don't know how to deal with it. And they say that the only way to deal with it is to say there's no God, right? And Kushner wrote a best-selling book, When Bad Things Happen to Good People. He had a son tragically died of progeria, a disease that ages the body. So like you're an 80-year-old in the body of a 10-year-old. And basically he says, I looked into my deeds and my actions, my wife and this and that, and we're pretty good. We're not so bad. So must be God doesn't exist, right? It's through suffering, usually. Right. And he came to the wrong conclusion. That's basically heresy. He didn't read the end of the book of Job, right? Where God says, Job, you think you know what's going on? You think you're in control? Okay, we're not even going to get to Job. But I think that is a fundamental issue of why people would say I'm 100% an atheist. Now, someone as an agnostic, okay, they're going to say, well, I'm not really sure. Maybe there is a God, maybe there isn't. That doesn't necessarily have to do with suffering. Could be other things, whatever it is. But I think the majority of people who fall into either category are very quick not to look at any evidence. And they want to say, okay, I don't have to do anything. I'm not obligated. Forget about which religion is right. We're not even going to go there, right? But the idea is they're not thinking critically. Because if you think critically, you can think, everyone thinks that, you believe in God, you left your brains somewhere else. Like it's all a leap of faith. Okay, that's for the Christians. Jews believe. And, we're going to show that our belief is strong in the fact that, everything happened and it's through knowledge, right? It's not one big leap of faith, right? So those are basically the three possibilities. So we're going to hit a few different approaches here. One approach is going to be scientific. We're going to look, does science at all show that the world could be made by design? Or there's certain things, let's say in the Torah, we'll look at the Torah a little bit. There are things said in the Torah, how could a person, even if they have a 250 IQ, how could a person make such a claim, right? First one we're going to see from science. You look at Deuteronomy chapter 14, verse 9. I'm going to quote one verse, I think, over here. Torah says that you're allowed to eat in the water, right? Anything that swims if it has fins and scales, right? That you're allowed to eat. So God says to Jewish people, I give you two witnesses. I give you two witnesses in order to eat fish. What are the witnesses? It's got to have scales, has to have fins. So if you find scales and fins on the body of a fish, right? I don't even have to, all I need is scales or fins. So I automatically know this fish is kosher, right? It doesn't need ritual slaughter, certainly like an animal. So if I saw a packaged fish, I didn't know what it was. Let's say it didn't have any rabbinic supervision on it, but in the package itself, it has scales. There are scales there. I can assume it has fins. I could eat it. As long as it's not processed. Let's say it's raw, right? Or whatever. It's frozen. It's not cooked. So, it won't have no kashrus issues over here. So if it has fins, it is going to have scales. Now, interesting enough, what's the percentage of the world that is water? Is 72%. Just in case anyone wanted to know, it's 72%. How many different species of fish are there? There are 40,000 different species of fish, right? Billions of different species, 40,000 different kinds of fish, billions of different species, etc. Comes the Talmud itself and says that exactly what we said. When the Torah tells me it's going to have scales and fins, it's never going to have one without the other. That is going to be 100% an impossibility. So if I find a fish and it's got scales, right? I scratch it off, they fall off the same body, it's going to have fins, right? Or, if I have fins, it's for sure going to have scales. You're not going to have one without the other. So Moshe Rabbeinu tells the Jewish people, okay, this is the criteria. The world is 72% water. How in the world did Moshe Rabbeinu make such a statement? How can he make such a statement? Unless he was Dr. Doolittle. We'll speak about Dr. Doolittle in a second. And he can talk with the animals. Imagine 40,000 different types of fish, right? Different species, whatever it is, all over the world. He was in one area of the world, right? Imagine the money, the manpower. Forget the money. Manpower, right? The manpower in order to go all over the world and be able to make such a statement. That is one thing. Now, there's another thing over here. We'll speak about kashrus, and that is that when you eat what is a animal that you're going to be allowed to eat, right? What does the Torah tell me? Tell me how am I to differentiate between kosher and non-kosher animals? So what does the Torah tell me? Torah tells me the animal needs to chew its cud, and it has to have split hooves, right? Two things. I need both. I can't have one without the other, right? In other words, it's not the same as scales and fins. You can have certain animals, we'll see, that only have one sign, right? It's kind of a fake out. I'm going to show you we're sort of kosher, right? We only have one sign, right? So bottom line is you need two things. You need the animal to be able to have split hooves, and you need it to be able to chew its cud. Now, if you don't know, you'll find out now, that there are 2 million different species of animals, right? 2 million, we name them, interesting enough. What does the Torah tell me? Torah tells me what animals are kosher: cow, sheep, deer, right? When it comes to, domesticated or seemingly non-domesticated animals as well, right? As long as they have those signs, so then it's a kosher animal. But what does the Torah, though, tell me? Torah tells me there are 4 animals that may fool you, right? Beginning of chapter 11, book of Leviticus, Torah says they have to have split hooves and chew its cud. So how do they fool you? So they only have one sign. We mentioned they only have one sign. Now, if there are 2 million types of species, right? Do the math. 4 out of 2 million. Torah tells me only 4 have one sign, right? What are they? The camel, the pig, rabbit, and the hare. Right, another type of rabbit. So either they chew their cud or they have split hooves, right? You don't see any other animals, and up until today there is no exception. So again over here you're going to tell me how did Moshe Rabbeinu know, right? Science comes along and says this is exactly the case, right? That science does not come over here to contradict. So Moshe Rabbeinu says, more than 3,000 years ago, Moshe Rabbeinu says these are going to be the exceptions. What if there's another exception? What if there are 2 exceptions? Obviously, anytime you find an imperfection, right, in any book, it's not true. It's made up, right? Christianity, many mistakes. Islam, many mistakes. So over here, all you have to do is check. Right? We'll do a Wikipedia search, right? We'll do a search all over the internet. Anything come close to these 4? Are there any other exceptions? 4 out of 2 million, right? Again, he's only living in one part of the world. He didn't travel the world. We don't have any midrashim or anything else saying, he flew all over the world. It took hundreds of thousands of men in order to verify. 2 million's a lot of people. A lot of animals. 4 out of 2 million, do the math. Very, very tiny percentage, almost zero. Right? It's almost zero. So how did Moshe Rabbeinu know that? Right? In other words, someone's not going to we can get into prophecies also. I'm not going to do that now. Right? But in general, when the Torah makes statements like that, then either Moshe Rabbeinu, the smartest guy ever created, had an absolute photographic memory and everything else, and he could see everywhere in the world. I don't know. Torah doesn't tell me that. Right? Carrots would be very happy. Torah doesn't tell me that. Not even close. Right? Okay. Torah says, God said to Moshe, you tell the Jewish people, this is the deal. Right? Now, even if you want to tell me it's written by a committee, right, by 4 authors and a redactor, right, there is such an opinion called the Welthausen documentary hypothesis. Right? 4 authors and a redactor. Even if you want to tell me it's written by a committee, how in the world is this committee going to know such a thing? How in the world are they going to know that? You're going to say, wow, they're the most gifted people in the world. Maybe they are. 4 out of 2 million. Come on, that's the odds explode over here. So that's a second example to show that the Torah itself, when it makes such a statement, mankind would never have come up such a thing. That's the second thing. Let's look a little bit, look at astronomy. Now, in astronomy, it's interesting. When you speak about the Earth, right, we understand the world is round. There still are some idiots out there think it's flat. I don't know why, but it's standing in space, no foundation, turns around the center, 1,700 kilometers an hour. Pretty darn fast. And it shifts a little bit. It shifts a little bit by, I don't know, 28, 27, 28 degrees, whatever it is. Comes along the Zohar, right? Zohar, written at the second time of the Second Temple by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and it was passed down. It was passed down later, written down later. So the Zohar says that the whole world is turning around like a ball, right? That's what the Zohar tells us. So this is talking a few thousand years ago. So up until 500 years ago, everyone argued shape of the world, right? Most people believed 100% it's flat. You go to the other side of the world, you're going to fall off, right? Just like falling off a cliff, right? But what happened? What happened? Comes along Christopher Columbus. Everyone remembers, maybe, that when he went on his famous trip and he ends up at the same ports, when he came back, he said, wow, world can't be flat, right? It's gone around in a circle. Now, Zohar was 1,500 years before Columbus, right? Zohar says the entire world is round. Now, something else interesting in the Zohar, while we're on this, that you have people live in different parts of this, of this ball, right? We'll call the earth this ball. So you got one side, you got the other side, right? You got one side of the world, the other side of the world, etc. And people in different parts of the world have different faces, image, color, right? What's it based on? Based on climate, right? Certainly based on climate, different continents, different, it's different weather, all kinds of things. So up until, a few hundred years ago, the scientists found that genes are influenced, not Levi genes, but genes in our body. Genes are influenced by the air, by the climate, where they live. So it depends where you live. Now, after a few hundred years, what happens? Even if a person, let's say, was white, what could happen? Right? Certain places they could change color, right? They get, darker, etc. And you can have certain people that are, black, some people are blonde, whatever. It depends, it depends where a person, is in the world. So therefore, you can have, you can have Jews all over the world. They all look different, right? They're all, they're all look different, just like people live in different parts of the world, right? They can all, they can have different skin color, different, whatever it is. So that again has only been proven in the last few hundred years, right? But the Zohar came well before that. So you're talking more, you're talking 2,000 years ago, where that was certainly clarified, which now, they're only discovering now. One other example, that will show, it doesn't necessarily show, it shows in science, how many stars in the universe. But actually, we don't even really need that, because that's not necessarily proof for God. It just shows that science and Torah, do not contradict. So science, we see a number of things here that the Torah 100%, in this case, we could argue, I'm not going to say it's a full argument here, but in theory, we could argue that through science itself, that when we see what the Torah says, just by kosher fish, just by kosher animals, for example, that in a million years never could have ever been written by a man, because there's no possible way a man's ever going to write such a thing, right? How is he going to say, well, this is for sure true, right? Because God said it. Okay, very good. Well, if you can disprove it, or you can show there's a flaw, then it doesn't really matter. You can say God said it, it's wrong, right? It goes off the rails, so to speak. So what do we have over here? So we have beyond the shadow of a doubt, in these cases, this could not been written by man. There are many other examples. I don't want to, go through, spend all the time there, but that could show. Again, we're just saying could, because we're going to look at other evidence as well, and that's exactly, it's basically how you would write a term paper, right? You have a thesis, now you're going to go try and prove it. So that's what we'll call the scientific approach. Now, there's another approach that we could use, and again, even, we could look at it as a moral approach, right? This is going to be the second approach, the moral approach to God's existence. Now, how are we going to show a moral approach? So the question is going to be that there has to be a universal standard of ethics, right? In other words, there's going to be a standard of right and wrong that's going to extend across any geographic, any temporal boundary, right? What that means is it's never going to change, right? It's not a 5-year option to renew, right? It's not based on, let's say, what the majority of people say today. We're going to see there are a number of factors we're going to knock out that we're going to have to say that it has to be God who dictates, because every other argument is going to be fickle and we're going to demolish it, right? So what's the question? Morality can't change, right? It has to be 100% constant for all generations. So the question we'll throw out there is that there's an idea that murder is always wrong, right? Nothing to talk about. Murder is always wrong. And there's something unethical about slaughtering guiltless, non-threatening human beings, right? Anytime, any place. Now, we could justify. In theory, we could say, wow, these people deserve to die for this or that, right? But again, what are the factors? How are we going to determine, right, that this is going to be for all time, right? So therefore, we have to come up with something, right, with some idea, whatever it's going to be, that is going to show across the board, any time and place, any history, whatever it is, you are always going to say that murder is wrong. So now the question's going to be, who determines who's the authority to establish such a principle, right, and make it wrong? So there are a number of possibilities, which aren't really possibilities, but we're going to throw that out there because I, want to give the benefit of the doubt. I want to show how open-minded I am. One possibility is maybe murder is wrong because of some abstract principle, right? In other words, some reason is going to dictate we take whatever action that's going to get us to, it's going to get us to a certain goal. So they're going to say, okay, what's the goal? What exactly is the goal over here? So now maybe we're going to say, we'll use reason, right? We'll use reason in order to rule out or not rule out murder. Maybe we'll say it's okay. Maybe we won't, right? If we want to stop someone from affecting the world, what better way to stop them? We don't want them to have influence, right? So what do we want to do? We want to kill them. Right? We don't want them to have influence. Okay, that might be a little bit drastic, right? Nonetheless, if we want to stop them from affecting the world, there's no better way of silencing them than by killing them. So maybe it's for some, extraneous reason, some abstract reason. Maybe it's not about survival, right? It could be we can say, well, murder is always going to be okay if it's for the sake of survival, right? But, we'll have cases where that wouldn't necessarily be the case, where I don't have to murder. I could stop the person, I could do other things, but it doesn't necessarily mean I have to murder. And then even if someone says, well, I'm allowed to murder them, then you're going to have to come up with another reason. So we'll give an example here. We'll give an example that it's not just about survival, right? Well, what would we say? We would say, don't do to others that you don't want them done to yourself, right? So i.e. murder. Now, why can't you say such a thing? maybe it's not just about survival, but it's living by that ethic. So we see that's flawed for one very simple reason. You see that by Japanese kamikaze pilots, they gave their lives to win World War II. Now, people are going to think, oh, these people are crazy, and they're lunatics and whatever. Not true. They were intelligent military officers. What did they want? They valued Japanese victory more than their own lives. Right? Many examples we can see today, with the Arabs or the Muslims that are willing to give up their life for the sake, okay, they're doing it for the sake of religion, or whatever. So you might say, they're not intelligent, they are intelligent, whatever it is, but they're doing it for a higher purpose over here. So they value, so in this case, by the kamikaze pilot, he values his life, right? He values, Japanese victory more than his life. Now, someone's going to argue, what about, if you're going to tell me that living is the highest value, right? People are going to say, well, I don't want to die. So therefore, the highest value is to stay alive at whatever cost. So then someone could say, well, murdering someone else is a good idea. In other words, it's going to help me. It's going to be beneficial in some way, right? If a person could get away with it, maybe it's beneficial, right? In the long run, I'm just, wiping them out of my misery or the world's misery or whatever the case is. So maybe I could make a rational decision and say that murder's okay, right? What's a good example of that? One example would be euthanasia. Euthanasia, mercy killing, because, the person's suffering, you feel the person's suffering, and, even if they wake up, they'll be a vegetable, whatever, so save them from their own misery and just pull the plug, right? We could be extremely rational. At the time of the Greeks, what did the Greeks do? So when the parents got old and difficult for them to take care of themselves, they took them up to a mountain, said, Mom, Dad, it's been real, adios, right? So they say, well, weren't the Greeks, that we're living in a Greek world today, weren't they so sophisticated and all these philosophers and whatnot? Okay, they're not directly killing them, but they're making their survival go by the wayside. Now, the problem is, even if a person had 100% perfect logic over here, if it's based on an immoral premise, then it's going to generate an immoral conclusion, right? In other words, we'll take euthanasia. Person suffering. Okay, you are deciding what this person's going through, and you're going to play God over here, and therefore your conclusion is going to be skewed. So what do you need over here? We'll get through the philosophical mumbo jumbo here. You need the moral aspect and the rational aspect to be equal. But that's not always going to be the case, right? Sometimes the moral aspect, sometimes the rational aspect are totally unrelated. Some things are more moral, but they're irrational. Other things may be immoral, but it might be immoral. Let's say killing a loved one, it seems to be immoral, but it's rational. You don't want them to suffer, right? But you don't normally have both of them at the same time. So now, by basis of that, if there's no inherent relationship between morality and logic, then what am I basing my thesis on? Reason, right? So reason, if it's based on morality and logic, that goes out the window, right? It cannot be the source of murder, right? Because that is always wrong, because there could be certain circumstances where murder isn't wrong. I'm saving them from their suffering. I'm saving them, from other things. I'm putting them out of the world's misery, whatever it is. So a rational explanation is going to change, right? It could change over time. It could also be immoral or not, right? You could have one without the other. But essentially, we would conclude you certainly need both. I need morality. I need reason, right? But if that's the case, and I only have one and I don't have the other, so to speak, then reason over here cannot be the source. So that would be a second possibility that gets knocked off. So a third possibility could be murder's wrong. Why is it wrong? Because someone decided it's wrong. Now, this is going to be problematic for a number of reasons. First of all, one person decided it's wrong, or a group of people who gave them the right, right? Who gave them the right all of a sudden to change things? What's the standard? What, is it based on, they're trying to dictate morality, right? They're trying to say it's someone with the highest IQ, with the most money, biggest army, right? That's one argument against. And what's the moral status before the person was born? In other words, if you say today, okay, we're the ones in charge, we're the ones calling the shots, and therefore we're deciding if it's right or wrong. Okay, but what happened before you? Right? What happened 80 years before? 100 years before? Who decided? And who gives you the right to change what was decided before? Right? It's also going to be, that's also going to be an issue, because you're saying I am 100% the most unique person alive that I can give over this, right? And I can decide, or my committee can decide, and all that. The problem is, what about the people after you? Who's going to decide after you? It's not going to be forever. And who decided before you, right? Who came 80 years before? So therefore, we could say murder is wrong as long as this person or this group is alive. If they're not alive, how do I know what the source is, right? Again, we're trying to test the source that is universal and is going to be eternal. In other words, in all circumstances, 100% you need both of these factors over here. So now you're going to say, okay, how do I know it's wrong? How do I know murder is wrong? Maybe I know it's wrong because society decided, or maybe a country decided, right? Forget an individual, right? Forget a group of people. Maybe it's a huge group of people. It's a country. It's a society. Now we got a problem. We're going to have a problem with this, an obvious problem. We're not the only society, right? We may think the Western world, we are the only society. There are other societies out there. You got the Far East, you got Africa, they got different standards, right? They 100% have different standards. Who's to say your standard is right? And how can you put your standard and put it in everybody's face and say we're 100% right and everyone else is wrong? That's one thing. Second thing is going to be, what was the moral standard before Western man condemned it? In other words, if Western man comes on the scene and says, okay, these are the laws, this is the morality, this is it, what happened beforehand? Right? It's kind of like before JC was born, time stopped. It was like there was no time whatsoever. It's like a time warp. It's like being in a bad Star Wars movie or something. It's like you're in a time warp. Like before that, nothing ever happened. You read the Quran before Muhammad's flight from Mecca to Medina. It's like nothing happened. There was no time. But what happened over here? Western world decides we're much more intelligent. We're the harbingers of the Greeks and whatever. We got all this knowledge. We're the ones that make the decision. Who says you make the decision? You think what? The Far East, they don't know anything. Africa, they don't know anything. What gives you the right? So what happened beforehand? So we can't say murder is always wrong because our society says so. Who says? Right? The best we can say based on that is it's wrong and will be wrong as long as this society survives. But you cannot say this is eternal. You cannot say it's universal. It's universally unethical. How can it be universally unethical? Right? It's only based on your society. It's based on this time, this point in time, 50 years, 100 years, whatever that society is. But after that, then you got a problem. You definitely have a problem. Before that, let's say there was a standard. Who says the first question is going to be who says Western society is right? And even if they are right, what happens in the next generation or 2 generations or 5 generations, right? Who's to say that's still going to be the standard? What we see today, I think, is clear as day. We see morality changing all the time, right? In my parents' generation, talking 80 years ago, what went on in their generation or what was forbidden today not only become permitted, it becomes a mitzvah. right? So morality is relative, but it cannot be, it cannot be relative. What we're trying to show is that from a moral perspective, it has to be eternal. It has to be universal, right? So that's another, it can't be based on society, right? Because otherwise society before, society after, we get a problem. So we'll give another example. Again, I want to show how, open-minded I am over here, that maybe murder is going to be wrong because what does the Torah tell me? You go according to the majority, right? The majority for good, obviously not for bad. So you say, well, the majority man says so. Well, who's the majority? If you tell me 100% across the board, it's all mankind, well, it doesn't necessarily answer the question because you're only talking about people today, right? You're talking about people today or societies that rule or whatever the case is. But as we mentioned before, humanity changes. Eras change. Ethics change. I mean, most people are not aware of this. In the 50s, 40s, men wore hats. In America, in other places. When did that stop? Most people probably not aware. John F. Kennedy, my own hometown in Boston, right, took off his hat. That's when it stopped. That's when people stopped wearing hats. All of a sudden, he decided he stopped wearing hats. He stopped wearing a hat. So the rest of the world now, all of a sudden, they stopped wearing hats. Who gave him to decide, right? Nonetheless, you have different eras. If you have different eras, then things are going to change. Not everything should be able to fit according to this in different eras, right? So then you're going to tell me, okay, if you want to tell me across the board murder is forbidden and you're never allowed to do it through all time, how can you tell me it's dependent on a certain generation? Generations come, generations go. Certainly, as King Solomon says in Ecclesiastes, right, these things change left and right. So values can also change. Values for good, values for bad. Right, but they can certainly change. That's what makes it relative. Not only that, there are certain periods in history that the majority of mankind didn't necessarily seem opposed to murder. Right? In other words, early man, if you look at history, early man has either spent much of his time either killing people or evading those who sought to kill him. It was a doggy world, so to speak. Right? It was about survival. Either you have to take out somebody or they're going to take out you, right? You have to protect yourself. You have to protect your family, etc. Even over the last 70 years, right? This, I think, is a good example as well. You had somebody come along, Mr. Hitler himself, he should rot. He attempted to murder every single Jew in Europe. That was his goal. And who did he encounter military opposition from? No fewer than 20 of the world's approximately 100 nations, right? So in other words, there wasn't a single unthreatened country declared war against Hitler, and even a handful were doing it. The question is, were they opposed to murder or not? Now you might say, come on, the countries that didn't fight against them, he was destroying everything in sight, right? The most aggressive army on earth. So therefore, who's going to stand up against him? Okay, that may be true. That may be true to a point, but remember what the question is. Is it permissible or forbidden to murder? So in their heart of hearts, they could have held what he was doing was wrong, right? Systematic murder of one group of people. They could have said, well, we definitely believe it's wrong, but what are we going to do? We can't fight against them. Obviously, you see very few countries, were willing to fight against him. So if that were the case, if they really believed, now we're going to throw that premise out there. We're going to demolish it for one very simple reason. We'll see in a second, right? But the question's going to be, okay, if they're terrified of him and they're not going to declare war because obviously they don't want to get destroyed, they don't want their country to get destroyed, what's going to be? What do they believe when it comes to murder? I understand they don't want to fight. They don't want to get involved. America didn't want to get involved either until the Japanese attacked at Pearl Harbor. They weren't getting involved. They weren't interested. They had no interest to get to war over there. Okay, that got them in the war. But the question is, even if they didn't want to fight, Did they believe murder was wrong? Right? That is the question. So now, if most countries, let's look at it logically. If most countries disapproved of murdering innocent Jews, now what happens after the war? After the war, Germany gets defeated, right? I sort of let the cat out of the bag. They lost, right? Eventually they lost. Hitler died. Germany got defeated. Then all the nations, even if they didn't fight against the Germans, they should have all said 100% murder is wrong. They should have condemned what the Nazis did. So you're going to say, wow, there's still a lot of anti-Semitism, this and that. But again, what's the premise? The premise is murder is wrong at all times, right? That is the premise. So over here, if they're afraid to fight against the Nazis, so they all should have condemned what the Nazis did after the war. There's no repercussions over here. Nazis are defeated, right? Germany gets demilitarized and all that. So why don't the majority of nations? When I say the majority, it should be everybody. Doesn't everybody believe murder is wrong? Well, maybe not when it comes to Jews. Whatever it is, but there was in 1946 when England, France, the U.S., and the former Soviet Union sought global support for establishment of an international court. I mean, this is a scary proposition, right? This is a scary proposition to establish an international court to condemn war crimes and to try war criminals. How many nations? How many countries responded? 19. That is a fifth of the world's nations. So if they stayed out of the war because of fear, it should have been 100%. Why did only 20% of the world's nations declare its disapproval? Should have been universal. Should have been 100% universal. Now, the mentality back then, right? People probably not so aware. The mentality back then was that Hitler could do whatever he wants. Let him go, destroy, rummage, pillage, this, that. Just don't do it to us, right? Just let us stay out of it. There was major indifference, certainly getting involved. No question about that. There was fear, but there was also indifference. I mean, this boggles the mind. There's indifference to participation in the Nuremberg trials. Because if they really believe murder is wrong, why in the world do you have 20%? That percentage should be 100 if they're all against murder. You can't tell me, it's better it happened to someone else. It didn't happen to us. No. Is murder universal? That it's forbidden across the board? Doesn't matter who it's done to. Is it eternal or it's not? Right? That is the question. So therefore, humanity and going according to the majority, and this is a scary thought because, we're not that far removed from that. We see anti-Semitism all over the place today, no question about it, right? But humanity and going according to the majority over here certainly cannot be the source of our ethic that murder is always wrong. Why? Because again, we're taking out the fear aspect. If you don't have the fear aspect of going against Hitler, then you have to tell me that the majority of people hold murder is wrong. Now, the only other caveat is maybe you'll say, well, against gypsies, against other people, maybe it's wrong, right? Against the Jews, no one wanted to get involved. Everyone knew what was going on. Maybe you tell me anti-Semitism, all-time high, Jews deserved it, whatever reason. No one's getting involved. They're different. But how do you make that decision, right? In other words, if it's eternal, if it's universal, you can't say, well, this only applies to Jews. You can't say, according to the majority, this ethic is only applying to them. So that would knock out the majority issue. So then you may tell me, okay, maybe murder's wrong just because it's immoral, right? It's an immoral issue. It's not right. Why isn't it right? Right? Why, what case is it? Is it across the board? Do we say 100%? It's always immoral, right? So how in the world are you going to determine this? So if everyone thought so before things have changed, maybe people thought it before, but what about generations later? Maybe generations later will say no. right? Maybe we say it's a big mitzvah now, knock out some people, or maybe not. If it's about nature, right? Maybe we'll take a poll, right? We'll take a poll over here. Well, you have to do it with, with masks on or whatever. Maybe do it online, whatever the case is. You take a poll of every living thing that exists, right? In the natural world, right? In the natural world, talking about animals, insects, whatever, right? So if you would take a poll, not a literal poll, obviously, you take a poll of all living nature, of all living things, what would they say about murder? They're in favor. Why are they in favor of murder? Because, again, we mentioned before, it's either a matter of survival, i.e., kill or be eaten. Kill or be killed, right? That is what animals are going to say. Of course, they're not going to have a question over here, because in their world, it's either survive or die, right? Either I put my best foot forward to protect myself and my loved ones, and if I don't, I could die. My loved ones could die. So in natural life, it's always a matter of survival. So therefore, then we bring in Darwin. So we want me to bring in Darwin here. Darwin would say, right, not so in vogue today, well, except in academia, but Darwin would say it's survival of the fittest, right? That's where you get survival of the fittest. So, I have to take them out before they take me out, right? It's like being a good sniper or a bad sniper. I have to kill them before they get to me. So maybe I'll say in that case, instead of me dying, I'll kill someone else. And if I kill someone else, it's justified. And it should always be justified in this case. Why? Because otherwise they'll come after me. Right now it could be their brothers, sisters, whoever. Maybe they'll come after me afterwards. Doesn't matter. So I got to try and knock them off as well. So therefore, according to this, when we're talking about survival of the fittest, right, we'll say that murder's okay. If it's wrong, if you're going to say it's wrong, then the entire natural world would be overruled. So this gives the ability now. So when you look at that, we gave a whole number of possibilities of how you determine, what something that's going to be universal. Because someone's going to say, well, I'm good. Well, how do you define goodness? Right? It's also part of the argument. Goodness means I pull the plug from somebody and, I take them out of their misery. That's good for us. It's good for them. I mean, not necessarily good for us, but we're taking them out of their misery. So you have to have definitions. But we're seeing from the moral argument that if your definition does not stand the test of time, not for that generation, not for certain groups of people, not for certain countries, not for all mankind, certainly not for nature, not for the natural world, we just knocked off all these different issues, right? So now, what is possibly if you want to try and prove it's eternal, or it's universal, across the board, all generations. So if we knocked off 6, 7, 8 different questions about morality, we hit it from all sides, showing that it can't be proved one way or another in all generations to say murder is wrong. What is the other possibility? I mean, there are other proofs. We're not going to get to the other proofs now because you're going to tell me I got 35 seconds, right? But the alternative, 20 seconds. The only other alternative is that God is absolute and God declares that this is wrong. Now, again, that also has to be defined, right? Because if someone comes to murder you, right, you're allowed to take them out. Now, if you can stop them and not murder them, okay, there are fine lines over here, right? But in general, if you're going to tell me murder is absolute, and murder, in the case of murder, never changes throughout all generations, then the only way that's going to work in this case, or the possibility, is going to be someone made it absolute, and that it never changes, right? Who is that person, being, whatever? The only other person that could do that, being that could do that, is God himself. And that is going to show across the board that things do not change. Now, again, in the Torah itself, it says don't kill. Okay, that is a general prohibition. And then we have to see how it applies. That's not saying it's not absolute, because in all generations, that is not going to change. The definition's not going to get changed. Forget about getting into oral law and all that. That is going to be universal across the board. Bring it from all kinds of different angles. The law is going to stay the same. So if the law is going to stay the same, across the board, then that would show that God is the one who had to give it, because we understand God is absolute, and God doesn't change. And these things don't change over time, right? In other words, we're going to say don't kill doesn't apply in this case, right? It doesn't apply according to the majority. It doesn't apply according to this. It doesn't apply. It's not true. Don't murder means don't murder, right? That is forever. That is for all generations. Only one being who can make such a claim, right? For that to be true without anything else, without anything changing. We just gave 10 different examples, 8, 9 different examples of how morality can change. We just said the fact that murder is always going to be forbidden if it changes in any generation, in any time period, for any reason, then it can't be universal, right? Because it's relativism. That is the problem with moral relativism. It makes it relative to that generation, to that time or whatever. Torah, we understand, is universal. If Torah is universal, then this never changes. If this never changes, it must be, in conclusion, a possibility that God is the one who's absolute, and the only reason 100% across the board that murder is forbidden is because God declares it and it never changes. See, I did that in 25 seconds. That wasn't so bad, right? And that's the only other conclusion you can come to. So that would be a moral way of looking at the fact that God has to be in charge. God has to be in charge of morality. There's a cosmological issue. We'll deal with. There's the historical analysis. Obviously, we're not gonna get there now. But
Sure.
This is a definite possibility of how morally we can approach and say that we can say with certainty, not just, we're not just saying, well, I just believe God is absolute and that's it. Well, if you look at it from a moral perspective, we just knocked out all these other possibilities. So you're only really left with one conclusion, and that is you need a superior being. You need God himself to make it absolute. Otherwise, everything else falls down like a stack of cards. That is what I would say according to the moral approach. I guess whatever. Next week we'll hit other approaches to God's existence.
Gotcha. Okay, so there's a guy on YouTube. I'll call him out. Blaster Master 80 says basically that the only thing that can be proven is math, or math can only prove things. So I gave the example of if you walk outside and there's water falling from the sky, that's proof that it's raining. But he kind of justified that. So this guy's probably an atheist, I'm assuming. So how would you respond to someone who is an atheist and they say the only way you can prove things is with math?
I mean, you could look at something through statistics. I mean, one example that I gave to this college student was that I said, how do you? I was a history major in college, university, and I had to write a term paper. So I said, how do you write a term paper? You have a thesis. Through your thesis, you prove it, right? You got to prove it. Now I asked him. I said, what happens if you take that thesis, you prove it, and then you have some doubts, and then you write a conclusion? He said, you can't do that. You'll fail. I said, why? He said, because you didn't prove your point. I said, okay. So let's say there's enough. You have to evaluate the evidence. So let's say there's enough evidence in the world. Let's say there's 70%. Let's say 70%. I can convince somebody that there's a world of design, that there has to be a God. It could not be how the world came in existence. Take an ink dropper, and the ink falls, and all of a sudden explodes, and it goes in different directions and different things, etc. The world, we're going to see the world looks, by design. They're going to say, well, who says there's a designer, right? Maybe, it's a big bang, and maybe, it happened this way and happened that way. Okay, so you have to evaluate. One of the things you have to do, or the main thing is like writing a term paper. You have a thesis, so now either prove it or disprove it, right? But if there's enough evidence on the side, just for argument's sake, there's enough evidence to prove it, right? Even if it's not 100%, nothing's going to be 100% because obviously we have free will, right? And there could be doubt, a person can still have doubts. But if you show enough evidence, if you know in a roulette wheel, for example, 70% of the time it's going to be red 13, right? That's proven. Let's just say that 100%, that 70% is proven. Aren't you going to bet a lot of money on this on the roulette that thing's going to come up? You got to say, listen, I'm not going to bet that much money because it's only 70%. You got a 7 out of 10 chance, right? It's at some point you're going to make money. You should make big money, right? You're going to say, nah, but you can't prove that. What do you mean? If it's proven, so you're going to say, wow, that's mathematical proven. Whatever, right? Any evidence a person wants to look at, you could always disprove. You say, no, it happened like this. That's not really a full proof. Yeah, we could do that. We can spend all day going back and forth, and certainly do that, right? So you say, well, I go outside, I know it's raining. Very good. So where'd the rain come from? Okay, it came from the sky. Where'd the sky come from? How'd the sky make rain? Well, clouds get together. Well, how does that work? Well, then you have wind. Where'd the wind come from? Right? So they say, well, it came from, different things or whatever, from the earth, blah, blah, blah. So where'd the earth come from? Right? You're getting further back, and you have to either say there was a big bang or something happened, and the world was created, or you say it was just a big accident, right? But you have to be logical also, and you have to say, well, if it's a big accident and nature exists because all these molecules came into existence, isn't that pretty? What are the odds of that?
Right.
1 in 10 billion. 1 in 10 trillion.
I like the ink dropper thing that you.
One quick thing that if you take ink, from a quill, you would drop it on a piece of paper. Is it going to come out the same every time? Certainly not. Right? It's always going to be different. What are the odds? All the amino acids and everything in one spot. Boom, happened like this. All nature's the same. How come the Earth hasn't gone closer to the sun and we get incinerated? How come it doesn't go a little bit further away? We're like Pluto. We're like a frozen tundra. You're going to say, well, that's nature. Where's nature come from? Right? In other words, you have to answer these basic questions. You can say, well, it's all by accident. Well, it could be. Maybe it's an accident.
I would go as far as to say that.
Bad accident. You shouldn't be listening to me. Right? But again, you have to evaluate evidence. That's what it is. If you knock off all the evidence or most of the evidence, okay. Right? So then you got a good proof. Then you got a good proof it's not true. But if you don't evaluate the evidence, you just say, well, I can always prove things mathematically. I just showed from a moral perspective, from a science perspective. I got 3-4 other perspectives to show there's a possibility 100% that there is a design, right? And we'll show that there's a design. So even if 60% is proven, that's a heck of a lot of information. That's a heck of a lot of proof. I mean, there's a ton of proof. The question is how you evaluate the evidence and if you're really going to be intellectually honest. It's not just about math. Right. It's not just about scientifically showing something, right? There are other ways. There are other ways to prove that. I can prove things historically. Historically, things that happen to Jewish people never happen to anyone else. Right. Totally against nature. That's not normal.
I want to go back to your. I want to go back to your ink dropper example.
You could also say, one
Rabbi,
other quick thing.
Right. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, let me drop this in real fast. We've got a few more minutes if you want. The whole thing about the ink dropper, you mentioned the idea that what are the chances if you drop the ink dropper and it spreads, it makes the same pattern every single time. Well, what the atheists are claiming is that not only can you drop the ink dropper, but when it splatters, it will create a Mona Lisa. Right? It'd be like a tornado hitting a junkyard and producing a fully fueled 747 jet ready to fly. That's their claim, right? I know they're not going to claim that. That's the equivalence of what they're claiming. So,
that doesn't make any sense. In other words, you're talking about creation of the world, and nature and universes and weather and all these things. You want to say all of a sudden things happen by accident, but why does it still continue? It's Stephen Hawking, whether you hold by him or not, his conclusion in A Brief History of Time, science. He was the biggest physicist of this generation. Nothing to talk about. He proved in his book, go read A Brief History in Time, he showed beyond the shadow of a doubt we're living in an expanding universe. If it's not an expanding universe and it's finite, right, then you got a major issue. Then you're going to have a major issue. So if it's continuing and it's expanding, why is it expanding? Because you're going to say that's the way it was set up. That's the way it happened after the Big Bang. Or whatever happened. But again, it's like the example I was going to give is during the Gulf War, 39 Scud missiles shot from Iraq, in Israel hit empty spaces. Now, Iraq's not that far from Israel. Unless you have the stupidest, people shooting these things, they all end up almost in empty areas. Now, there are 39 Scud missiles. What are the odds of that? What are the odds? 1 in a billion? 1 in a trillion? 1 in 10 trillion? You're going to say it could happen. If it happens once, okay. Happens twice, okay. 4 times, 5. You got major cities. You got Tel Aviv. You got Haifa.
Right.
You got Tiberias. You got other cities all across the coast that these Scud missiles should hit. So you're gonna say, "Wow, the wind came and knocked this one out. Something else happened over here." But again, at some point, you have to say, what are the odds of something like that happening? And if it's a very small chance, what else do you attribute it to? You can't attribute it to nature. That doesn't make sense. Right? Because according to nature, what's going to happen is all you need is one Scud to hit in the middle of Tel Aviv. Tens of thousands could be killed in one shot. Hit an apartment building. How could they hit open areas? I mean, Israel has, there are a lot of open areas, but for goodness sakes, they're in, they're major cities. There are major cities. You didn't hit anything? You're the biggest doofus in the world. You don't know how to shoot a missile that was supposed to be pinpoint accurate. So I have somebody that took off his watch and tried, was going to figure it out mathematically. So if it's 1 in 10 trillion, don't you think the odds are like 0, 0, 0, 19 zeros? You know what the percentage? That's 0.
Right.
That is a 0 percentage. You cannot say, well, they were lucky. There's no such thing. That should never happen, ever. It's a 0% chance. There's only one other conclusion. The only other conclusion is God knocked these things out. That doesn't make sense otherwise. If you tell me they didn't know what they're doing, they don't know how to shoot them, they're shooting them in all different directions, it's one thing. They're all shooting towards the same area. And it's only 40 kilometers away. It's not that far, right? So what are the odds? So when you look at these different things, you can also say, well, that's not a proof. Okay. I'm not saying it's a full proof. How else do you, when you're boxed into a corner, what else do you say? How did that happen? You're going to say it happened by accident. 39? 39 in one shot by accident? Didn't hit anything?
Right.
All they hit was dirt? All they hit was fields? And there was nobody there? That's pretty darn inaccurate. That guy should have been fired from firing these missiles. Then you have to tell me, well, these people aren't so smart. They don't know what they're doing. They fired backwards. They all hit in different areas that didn't hit a building. That's pretty amazing, right? So again, is that a proof in God's existence? Explain to me through nature how that happens.
Right.
If you can't explain it through nature, you have no other choice. But again, what you have to do, it's not just about mathematics, right? It's about looking things in different ways, whether historical, astrological, whatever it is, that shows beyond the shadow of a doubt there's something else going on. Is one thing itself going to be foolproof? Not going to be foolproof. Certainly not. But if I have enough evidence, and I bulled my way through term papers by bringing evidence and different things, whether it was or whether it wasn't, right? In order to make the point, if I have 10 points and I get 7 or 8, 100% proven, the other 2 don't matter, right? That's 80%. That's 8 out of 10 or 7 out of 10. You can say, Steve, this guy told me though I have 99. If I prove it 99%, I can still have my 1% doubt. Okay. You still have free will, so it doesn't matter what you prove. But if you prove it enough, and you have to evaluate the evidence. Is it valid evidence? If it's not valid evidence, and you can just brush it off, okay, right? I just gave you 8 or 9 examples of a moral approach that doesn't work, right? So you can say, okay, we'll use another approach. We'll use other approaches as well. But when you start combining different things, and you see how the pieces fit, to the puzzle, you can't just knock it off. Is it a miracle? Don't you think it's a miracle? You take an apple seed, you put it in the ground, and it grows apples in a tree, everything being equal. Why should that be? You can tell me, of course that's the way it is. That's the nature of an apple seed or an orange seed. Why is that? And why is there no mutation? Why is it that if I plant it next year or whatever, and it doesn't grow, right? And nothing happens, and that's it. No more orange trees. Why should it be that way? You say, come on, that's the way it is. That's nature. Okay, so where does nature come from? But why has it been that way for throughout the millennium? Why doesn't it change? Why doesn't the earth get closer to the sun? Why aren't we incinerated? Why aren't we like Pluto? Because that's the way it is. That's the way the axis turns. That's how we can prove it scientifically. Okay, very good. But the earth is sitting on nothing, right? As the Zohar says, it's a ball, in some orbit somewhere, and it's just, but why does it go faster? Why doesn't it go slower? Why doesn't the sun explode? If it gets so hot, why doesn't it just burn out like some stars do? And then there would be no life on earth. There are a lot of questions, we can ask, and there are a lot of answers we don't have. Right? You're going to say, well, that's the way it is. That's not an answer. Right? That's a third and long. Why is nature the way it is? Because someone's directing it. Because if someone wasn't directing nature, you wouldn't be listening to me. You wouldn't be here. You'd all be incinerated. Right? We'd be all fire. That's it. We'd be dust. Right? So you have to see where I'm not even going through nature here. Right? But I just brought it up. So, you take a look at that, you see things in nature. There are a lot of things don't make sense. Right, that why they stayed the way it is, right? You can say global warming, you can say other things, but again, none of these things should reproduce the way it does on a constant basis throughout the millennium. It shouldn't do that. There's no reason why it should. You're going to say, but that's the nature. Okay, if that's the nature, where does it come from? How do we define it? Right? Why doesn't it change? Right? These are obvious. I think these are obvious. These are obvious questions. But if someone is truly going to be intellectually honest, which I don't think too many people are, but if they're going to be intellectually honest, you have to evaluate the evidence. That is exactly what you have to do, and you have to see, does the evidence make sense or not? But you have to evaluate the whole thing. You can't just say, oh, that doesn't make sense. Oh, that doesn't make sense. If you see 10 things, right, and okay, you knock them all off, right? But if there's some you can't knock off, then you can't say, then you can't say, well, this just happens because it happens. It's not true. Right, I'm not even bringing, I'm not even bringing anything else, up here. But forget going through verses in the Torah and different things. We just proved that, just looked at a few different things. So we're going to see, next week we'll see from a cosmological, historical approach, why there has to be a guiding hand, a guiding light, and why it's not an ownerless world. Again, read Stephen Hawking's book. He's a scientist, right? He's a secular scientist, but he proved in a brief history of time the world's expanding, the universe is expanding. What does that show? It should show that the creation is right. That's what it should show. Otherwise, it'd be finite, right? That's what it should show. But okay, take a look over there.
Yep, very good. Well, looks like we're just on the tip of the iceberg right now. So we'll
where'd the iceberg come from, huh?
Of course.
Well, first it was water, then it got cold, and then there were freezers.
That's funny. Yeah, right. Very true. Very true. Good deal.
Don't get me started.
I know, right? That's funny. All right, well, good deal. Well, everybody, thank you for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed the show. If you like the show, please share it with your friends on Facebook or wherever else other social media you have. Be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you've done that and are not getting notifications, find me on Facebook, and you can actually find my posts there. Usually I don't post every show that comes up. I usually only post if I cancel the show. So that's kind of the case. But anyway, you can follow us there. Rabbi, thanks again for your time, and we'll see you same time, same place next week. Hashem willing. Take care, everybody.
חשוב